Welcome to this lecture on aspects of Western philosophy, module 27. This lecture is dedicated to the works of a very important German philosopher, very influential German thinker, Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche is important in many ways. One aspect which makes him important is that the way in which he writes not like an academic thinker, not like an academic philosopher, but with a lot of passion into it. So his writing style is also unique. There is I could remember only another philosopher who is very close to him is Wittgenstein, not in terms of their ideas or philosophical theories, but the way in which they present their philosophical ideas and theories. So this lecture will focus on the topics: critique of Western culture, religion and morality, where Nietzsche is very important in as far as these issues are concerned, where the Western culture, religion and morality are critically evaluated, and these evaluations of Nietzsche has tremendous influence on later philosophy, particularly 20th century philosophy, so much so that Richard Rorty, one of the prominent contemporary thinkers, has he even calls contemporary Western philosophy as post-Nietzschean. So it is a post-Nietzschean philosophy. Instead of calling it postmodern or something else, he calls it post-Nietzschean to indicate the influence of Nietzsche, or probably the kind of approaches towards philosophy which Nietzsche has introduced in his thinking. We will then see the concept of will to power and also the notion of Superman or Overman. I would be using the word Overman mostly, not Superman, because Superman, the contemporary translators prefer to use the word Overman. And Nietzsche's philosophy is of course related to several terms, several ideas which he has expressed through several terms, which some of them he himself had coined in philosophy, terms like will to power, for example, or Overman, which I have already mentioned, and several other terms like this. His major books in which he elaborates his philosophical theory were written over a period of actually he was born in 1844 in Rocken in Prussia and died in 1900. So not a very long life. During his early days he was interested in Greek and German literature, which he was tremendously influenced by these two things, German literature on the one hand and Greek philosophy on the other hand. And in his works also he often highlights or mentions his the importance of Greek philosophy. He considered the Greek thinkers, particularly the pre-Socratic Greek thinkers, as original and superior to all other European thinkers. In 1865 he joined the University of Leipzig, and after that he started, after joining this University of Leipzig, he started distancing from Christian faith. His father was Protestant and they were quite religious people, but he started distancing from religious faith from 1865 onwards, and in 1869 he started teaching classical philology at the University of Basel in Switzerland. Then in 1879 poor health forced him to end his teaching career, and in 1889 he had a sudden mental breakdown and became psychotic, and in 1900 he passed away. So this is a short life history of Nietzsche, and now let us see the important task he envisaged for his philosophical career. So Nietzsche actually looks towards a new mode of culture and society that would create stronger and more fully developed individuals. So this is again a very unorthodox kind of an approach in philosophy. All the philosophers whom we have examined so far were sort of more or less progressing towards the traditional lines. They are interested in certain questions of philosophy which even traditional philosophers themselves have posited as important, as perennial for philosophical thinking, but Nietzsche here takes a very clear deviation and thinks about, or rather problematizes, issues which are really different. So how to create stronger and more fully developed individuals is being posited, and his analyses are also extremely unorthodox. Modern age and its moral and ideological spirit are obstacles in human and social development. So, he is trying to prove this, demonstrate that how modern culture. So, that is the reason why we actually begin our analysis of Nietzsche's philosophy with a critique of Western culture initiated by him. Again, it is against the prevailing rational, moral and religious approaches to human reality. As we have been examining in the previous lectures, we can see the domination of rationalism or a kind of rational approaches to reality in the Western civilization with the advent of modernity and particularly with enlightenment. So, this rational approach and the morality that follows it, or the moral assumptions that follow it, and the religious approaches to human reality, all these are treated as very, I mean he was actually, Nietzsche was targeting all these things in his philosophical career. So, here is a quote from Nietzsche, I quote, "Mankind does not represent a development towards something better or stronger or higher in the sense accepted today. Progress is merely a modern idea, that is a false idea." So, here preface to his book Antichrist, Nietzsche makes this statement. Normally when we try to understand the modern, particularly 19th century European culture or European history, if you examine, you can see that there is a tremendous faith on the progress science can make to humanity, because there is that is one period where science had witnessed a lot of new experimentations. As a result of new experiments and new advancement in scientific theory, there are a lot of changes that was taking place in the world, and in this context it is quite natural to think that it is quite natural to be optimistic about the powers of science to change human destiny in more positive ways. But Nietzsche comes forward and expresses an extremely pessimistic picture by saying that mankind does not represent a development towards something better or stronger or higher. And it is very interesting to read in this context along with this quote from Nietzsche. It is very interesting to read this quote from another very great intellectual of 19th and 20th century, Sigmund Freud, who was also influenced by Nietzsche's work. He says that, "I have been careful to refrain from the enthusiastic prejudice that sees our civilization as the most precious thing we possess or can acquire, and believes that its path will necessarily lead us to heights of perfection hitherto undreamt of." So, this is from Sigmund Freud. Now, when we try to understand Nietzsche's critique of Western civilization, so as I mentioned in the beginning, Nietzsche was particularly fascinated by the ancient Greek civilization, and when he compares the ancient Greek civilization with the modern or the contemporary Western civilization of his times, he always condemned his contemporary culture and never missed an opportunity to express his admiration and respect towards the ancient Greeks. He says the highest culture of the ancient Greece versus the sick and inferior 19th century European and German culture that worships weakness and mediocrity. So, this is his complaint. This 19th century European civilization or culture worships weakness and mediocrity instead of I mean but instead if you examine the ancient Greek culture, you can see this is not the case. He appreciates ancient Greek life, a blend of Dionysian and Apollonian traits, the two central principles in Greek culture. So, this is the god Apollo of Greek mythology, who represents the god of medicine, death dealing and archery, a god of music and poetry. Again, Apollonians are well ordered, rational and serene. So, you have well ordered analytical people and cultured people in Apollonians. All types of form or structure and rational thought are Apollonian. So, this is one aspect of ancient Greek civilization according to Nietzsche, and Apollo is treated as a god, a divine figure by the ancient Greeks. And then another god is Dionysius, who is a god of ecstasy, terror, guilt and atonement, death and resurrection. vegetation, trees, wine, madness and drama. So just the opposite of the Apollonians, you will have Dionysians, and they are wild, frenzied and sensuous. So you have the antithesis of the Apollonians and Dionysians, and all forms of enthusiasm and ecstasy are Dionysian here. So this kind of a creative, or this kind of a conflict between the two aspects of ancient Greek civilization, when again this a tension between these two, a tension between and the fruitful merger of these two were responsible for the greatness of the ancient Greek civilization, and the principle of individuation, self control, order, equilibrium versus, these are all Apollonian values, versus the inclination to break any border and norm and to lose self control is the Apollonian, sorry, the Dionysians. So there is a creative conflict between these two, and also a kind of creative merger of these two that created the greatness, the glory, the tragedy of, this is actually in the context of writing the book, The Birth of Tragedy, tragedy as the manifestation of human creativity, the greatness of human creativity. This was possible because these two traits were present in Greek civilization and worshipped by the Greeks. The Greeks never considered that one is superior to the other, and both of them were considered as God. But instead, if you come to modern Europe, with the adoption of Christianity, the God, the concept of God which modern Europe or Europe after Christianity adopted is the God which is good, which is rational, or which is always, I mean there is a concept of goodness which is also developing as a result of the evolution of Europe into its modern age, which Nietzsche found is problematic. Now again, the glory did not last much, as he says, this creative conflict, it did not last much, with the emergence of more rational systematic thought dominating Greek civilization, particularly with reference to, he refers to people like Socrates, Plato and Aristotle, and their great systems of metaphysical systems which was developed by Plato and Aristotle, and also the methodology of dialectics employed by Socrates, where rational thought was dominant, was given a dominant place. So what happens is, he says, with Socrates, Plato and Aristotle, they idolized rational over the passionate, and then the spirit of dialectics destroyed the primordial instincts and life forces of man and culture, and then later on of course the adoption of Christianity. Now in this context, again this is a very interesting concept in Nietzschean philosophy, the idea of will to power. One reason why we understand Nietzsche as a teleologist, or there is a teleological approach adopted by Nietzsche, and though however anti-metaphysical Nietzsche looks, he is not actually that radical and anti-metaphysicist. He himself proposes a kind of metaphysics which is rooted in the conception of will to power, and there what he refers to, I mean what he means by will to power is something which is so intrinsic to all living creatures, all life, and which he considers should be ideally the driving force of humanity or all human beings as well. And he considers this will to power as the very principle of life, and hence as the very principle of human life ideally also. So any act which goes against the will to power, the assertion of the will to power, needs to be considered as bad or something which is inferior, and all those actions, all those initiatives that would promote the will to power, that would assert the will to power, needs to be treated as ideal and good by Nietzsche. So this will to power he considered as I repeat, the fundamental driving force of all life, which is therein, which is manifested in all life, not just in human life, and he would say that ideally human beings should imbibe it or try to live to that expectation, or try to live to a life which would ultimately strive to realize the will to power. Now let us come back, let us try to understand what is this. For Nietzsche it is the basic impulse for all our acts. This, an understanding of this will to power is extremely important in our understanding of Nietzsche's entire philosophy and also his understanding of the critique of Western civilization. So, it is the basic impulse for all our acts. Life is an instinct of growth. See, that is the way he understands life. Life is not something which needs to be lived on the basis of certain rational calculations or certain rational procedures to be followed and all that, but it is an instinct of growth, for survival, for the accumulation of forces and for power. So, he considers life in a very naturalistic manner, in a very wild manner, which is an instinct of growth and for survival. Life itself is will to power, an instinct for growth, for continuance, for accumulation of forces, for power. So, this is a kind of will to power in that sense is something which is a fundamental principle of life, which enables all life to continue living, continue its living, continue in its path of life, and to be in the path of life, to continue living means to overcome the status quo. One has to grow, one has to overcome what one is at this moment in order to move to the next moment. It necessarily involves a process of self overcoming. So, this self overcoming is what is materialized through will to power. So, life itself is will to power, an instinct for growth, for continuance, for accumulation of forces, for power, and nothing in life has value except the degree of power. The more powerful or the more power you can accumulate in life, the more power you can exert through living, the more you are progressing in the path of life, because that helps you to survive in a better way, also to overcome the status quo in a better way, progress in a better manner. Where the will to power is lacking, there is decline. So, this is his fundamental analysis, his so to say his moral evaluation. He would rather say that if the will to power is lacking, then that is the beginning of the decline, or rather that indicates a decline both in individuals as well as in civilizations and cultures. So, accordingly, when you try to understand and analyze Western civilization, this happens. This will is lacking in all the supreme values of mankind. So, this is his trans evaluation of values, we can call. Nietzsche is trying to analyze human value, the so called human values, sacred values, and all kinds of ethical and moral values, and he says that all these values ultimately aim at suppressing the will to life. They all try to contain it or control it, never allow it to express itself freely. Replace it, replace the freedom of the will to power with the kind of control, with the kind of domestication of the human self and human body. So, this is what essentially religious traditions and moral philosophies do according to Nietzsche. Every living thing does everything it can not to preserve itself, but to become more. That is why it is power to overcome. It is just not survival, just not be there what as it is, but to be more than what it is by overcoming what it is. So, it is a kind of negation of its present state of affair to a higher one. So, to become more, will to power is a proactive force and not just a reactive force to life, to surroundings, but it is a positive assertion. It is not just a reaction to what is going around, but a positive assertion, not power over others. So, that is another, I mean, there is a possibility of misunderstanding what is meant by will to power. It is not just a kind of power over others, other people, so that others can control, one can control others. So, this is one way in which Nietzschean philosophy is misunderstood by many, particularly when you try to read Nietzschean philosophy in the context of historical things which has happened in Germany during the initial half of 20th century, which has ultimately led to the Second World War, the emergence of Nazi regime. So, the Nazis were often identified with Nietzschean philosophy, or it is being argued that the Nazis have derived their philosophical assumptions or philosophical theory from Nietzsche's philosophy of Superman or Nietzsche's philosophy of will to power, etc., which is actually not correct, because for Nietzsche it is not just overcoming or overpowering other people or exerting power over others, it is more to do with oneself. It is but the feelings of creative energy and control over oneself that are necessary to achieve self creation, self direction, and to express individual creativity. So it is more a kind of self overcoming, it is a kind of having control over oneself, so that one can prepare oneself for the higher attainments of life. This concept of will to power is as I mentioned so central to Nietzschean philosophy, particularly when he examines or when he evaluates the concept of values, morality particularly. All morality and religion are against the assertions of will to power according to Nietzsche, hence all morality and religion have to be opposed, all existent moralities, moral frameworks have to be opposed. And during his time the most dominant kind of ethical frameworks were utilitarianism and Kantian deontologism, and he opposes both of them. They demand submission and they are anti nature and anti body, and attempts to discipline the body and in short kill the will to power. So all these religious traditions and moral philosophies and when were trying to discipline the body, and by disciplining the body they can ultimately kill the will to power, which is so central according to Nietzsche for human life. To replace will with obedience, freedom with submission, creativity with loyalty, loyalty to the authority, an external authority of the society or of religious traditions, etc. The kind of analysis which Nietzsche conducts is often called a genealogical analysis of morality. So the importance is that he is trying to he actually goes back to history and examines where the decline actually begins. So he says that, as I already mentioned, he considered the ancient Greek civilization to be superior to the contemporary, to the 19th century European culture, and he says that with the emergence of rationalist philosophical approaches with Socrates, Plato and Aristotle, the decline actually begins with the dominance of the doctrine nothing in excess in the moral tradition of the West. So this is basically a reference to Socrates, Plato and also importantly to Aristotle. Then again idealizing tame mediocrity or mediocrity, this is, and with the rise of Christianity historically we can see that, you know, when with the Europeans adopting Christianity, this has become the central motive of Western civilization, the emergence of the morality of the good and evil. This is what Nietzsche calls it, it is a morality of good and evil. So this morality is at the root of the decline. So what is the morality of good and evil? So this morality works on the basis of a dichotomy, certain things are considered, certain actions are considered to be good and certain other actions are considered to be evil. So Christianity, for example, is a religion which has a very clear separation between good and evil, certain acts are clearly dominated, clearly mentioned as good and certain others as evil. So here we can see Nietzsche's analysis of culture. What Nietzsche says about culture is it domesticates the body, every culture in one sense domesticates the body, submits individuals to discipline and mechanisms of social control. And on the right hand side you can see, you know, this culture which disciplines individuals and submits individuals to the social control mechanisms of social control can actually lead to two kinds of consequences. The first one is it can shape and form strong and healthy individuals, that is one possibility which is visible, which was visible in ancient Greece. And the second possibility is it causes individuals to be so severely repressed, resulting in guilt, sickness and decadence, which is what has happened in the case of modern Europe. So according to him, culture, which is a double edged weapon, can either shape very strong and higher individuals, on the other hand it can also it is also potential to make individuals weak and severely repressed. So and in this context he introduces another dichotomy, the difference between slave morality and herd morality, the slave morality and master morality, the master morality that existed in the ancient age and the kind of slave morality or herd morality that exists in contemporary in 19th century Europe as a result of the domination of the moral traditions and particularly of the Christianity's religious morality. Slave morality is created by domesticating the body. You discipline the body because body is, according to Christianity, the fundamental principles of Christianity, body is treated as the seat of all drives, all passions which man needs, an individual needs to overcome. So once you overcome the passions of the body, the drives of the body, you have a perfect control over the body so that you can dedicate yourself completely to the service of the soul. So this is a Christian assumption. So the Christianity as a religion asserted and highlighted the value of the soul over and against the body. The ascetic priest did this and negated the body, according to Nietzsche. This was a mechanism by means of which the weak took revenge on the strong, and there are historical reasons for that. What happens is that slave morality channels resentment inward against the body and outward against enemies of the herd. So here, by domesticating the body, the weaker individuals resent the prerogatives of the stronger. See, the stronger will always be a minority and they will always dominate the rest of the populace. So the weaker sections or the weak in the society would unite, and they have invented this slave morality which highlights or which considers submission or disciplining the body and submitting the body to the kind of disciplines, social disciplines, as extremely important, and by doing this they dominate the stronger people who are otherwise capable of expressing their freedom and attaining what they desire. So this is what it does. And herd morality, in that sense, there is a kind of relationship between herd morality and the body. Herd morality is primarily achieved by means of domesticating and suppressing the bodily desires, disciplining the body, suppressing all bodily drives and passions, negate and sacrifice the body by submission and obedience to the social forces and institutions for the sake of salvation in future heaven. This is precisely what Christianity does. For the sake of a heaven in your afterlife, for the sake of this otherworldly kind of an enjoyment in the heaven, you have to sacrifice the pleasures of this world, sacrifice the body by means of which you live in this world. The ascetic priest transformed powerlessness and resentment into discipline and social control, and the morality of the herd is created in this way, and it is characteristically different from the master morality, because the herd morality is the morality of Christianity. The Roman slave class invented it in order to proclaim their freedom, and so they invented values like equality, considered values like equality as very important, and justified this notion of equality with the help of Christian doctrines that all men are created by God, so all men are equal. So this concept of equality has been projected by the slaves in order to come out of their slavery, to dominate over their masters, or rather to equalize everything. They adopted Christianity and idealized its moral framework to justify their liberation from their oppressors. And on the other hand, master morality is that which dominates and opposes all forms of submission. It is against all forms of submission, because master morality aims at the assertion of will to power, which actually is a will to overpower everything, and it follows bodily drives, going beyond good and evil and beyond morality in that sense. So for Nietzsche, the herd morality is the morality of good and evil. It presupposes the fundamental dichotomy between good and evil. So what is it? Works on the basis of the dichotomy of good and evil, and which according to Nietzsche is the basis of all modern sickness. Whatever decline the 19th century European culture encounters is due to its adoption, its submissions to this morality of good and evil. Good as conceived as the intrinsic value of people and the world, which is divine. It presupposes the sole atomism of Christianity, all souls are equal, hence all are equal, equality. Then evil stands for the behavior of the powerful warrior type. Nietzsche tries to see it in this way. Here evil stands for the behavior of the powerful warrior type, those people who are capable of expressing themselves without any hindrance, without any inhibitions, those people who are capable of expressing and asserting their will to power, their behavior is being considered as fundamentally evil by this new morality which is evolving as a result of Christianity's adoption. They are uninhibited by conscience and hence are considered as ruthless. So this is what happens, and again it presupposes a dichotomy of the strong and the weak. The strong is expression of independent brilliance, are capable of realizing their desires directly, but on the other hand the weak can never do this, they cannot realize their desires directly because they are characterized by cowardice and helplessness. Then what is it? The desire for freedom is materialized by these people by advocating the herd morality, which according to Nietzsche is the mark of all decline. According to Nietzsche, the notion of evil is invented by the weak for the rescue of the enslaved and to control the independent brilliance of the strong who define their own place in the world. This is, I have already mentioned this. So they unite and they try to contain, they try to stop the strong who are capable of expressing their will to power. So it is actually morality is in that sense, the morality of the good and evil in that sense is a revenge of the weak and helpless upon the strong. And here we can see that he is advocating a severe criticism of the 19th century European culture, which is characterized by two things. Number one, there is a trust in scientific progress, life in this world is ensured by this trust, and number two, there is a faith in Christian morality lie in the other world. So Christian morality is based on the concept of otherworldliness, the concept of heaven. Every action you perform here has a greater significance to the life afterwards. This jointly, these two kind of the trust in scientific progress and also the faith in Christian morality initiate a kind of culture which is a culture of optimism. Life is safe and meaningful for the masses. According to Nietzsche, this leads to a kind of cultural sickness. And here this is what Nietzsche talks about the intrinsic worth of moral values. I quote, this is from Genealogy of Morals. The intrinsic worth of these values was taken for granted as a fact of experience and put beyond question. Nobody up to now has doubted that the good man represents a higher value than the evil in terms of promoting and benefiting mankind generally, even taking the long view. But suppose what exact opposite were true? What if morality should turn out to be the danger of dangers? So this is Nietzsche's view. So morality is not a science according to him. So there are no moral facts per se, and morality has been based on obedience. He says, as I mentioned, it involves some domesticating the body, the disciplining the body in a certain sense, and authority of the social institutions, rules and church will demand obedience from the individual, and moral and religious judgments belong to a level of ignorance according to him, and value judgments concerning life are stupidities. So this is his conception of or his evaluation of morality in general. And when he talks about modern morality, the 19th century morality which is dominated by Kantian ethics, he says that modern morality characterized by utilitarianism and Kantian ethics reduce the great passion of living to calculations and difficult formulations. So it makes morality or it makes life a rational exercise instead of trying to understand and live life very quote unquote lively manner. They weaken the human spirit by controlling and domesticating its creative and selfish passion, and herd morality is created by the denial of life. And Nietzsche says, this is a quote from Nietzsche, right, life itself is essentially appropriation, injury, conquest of the strange and the weak, and suppression, severity, obstruction and peculiar forms obtrusion of peculiar forms, incorporation, and at the least, putting it mildest, exploitation. Now what Nietzsche does is he attacks the very conception of morality by attacking what the very notion that lies at the basis, at the foundation of all moral values. The basis of morality according to him is, number one, the concept of universal and unchanging truth. If there is such a concept of universal truth, we can say that everything should be or ought to be subscribing to that or complying to that. So morality assumes such a universal conception of truth, number one. Number two, there is a concept of God and otherworldliness as it is stated by Christianity. Number three, the essential goodness in human nature which is advocated by modern philosophers, and the ideas of human essence advocated by philosophers like Plato. The recognition of the rational faculty in man as underlined by Immanuel Kant. So these can be understood as the basis of morality which Nietzsche attacks and tries to expose them by showing that they are actually not worthy to be pursued. And he says that this has happened, what he calls as the result of something he calls as the death of God. So what is it? He says that truth in the modern age, the concept of truth in the modern age can no longer advocate a conception of universal unchanging truth, particularly with the advent of philosophical contributions by people like Hegel, and also the invention important theory initiated by Charles Darwin, where truth is related to a concept of evolution. So a truth which evolves, that is the kind of idea which dominates modern age, and such a conception of truth cannot be the absolute truth of traditional philosophy, because truth is now becomes, since it is an evolving truth, it becomes perspectival, and a truth which is perspectival cannot be conceived as truth in the traditional sense of the term. So truth is nothing but truthlessness, or there is no truth. So all these ideas like universal truth, universal human nature according to Nietzsche are fabrications built by man and reflecting his psychological need, designed to promote the smooth succession of the status quo. What do you mean by the succession of the status quo? Prevention or rejection of the will to power which is asserted by individuals. So this has ultimately led to what is known as moral nihilism. If truth is perspectival, then there is neither good nor evil, everything is permitted and truth is perspectival, and if everything is permitted, this situation will open up a boundless area of freedom of strong men and races. And again, concepts of just and unjust, good and evil are inapplicable to the world, and this indicates the death of God. So as a result of this conceptions, this changing conception of God, the changing conceptions of truth, truth becoming perspectival, truth losing its absolute status, and the fundamental dichotomies that existed like just and unjust, good and evil, they were all based on the concept of truth which is foundational. Now with this concept becoming shaky, these associated notions also become shaky. This indicates the death of God. So this is another very important and interesting aspect of Nietzsche's philosophy, the concept of death of God. In modern world, people have lost faith in absolute values and truths. This as a result of the spread of perspectivalism, the idea of God that unites all men and gives meaning to human life has died in the hearts and souls of Western man. So this, according to Nietzsche, indicates a very interesting and a very important gesture in the history of Western life, in the history of Western Europe. Death of God, the disappearance of values from the horizon of European culture. So the thou shalt have lost meaning. As a result, once God disappears, the thou shalt, which ultimately find their justification and authority in the concept of God, will also vanish. So they also lose their meaning. With the death of God, there are no absolutes, and Nietzsche's Zarathustra, Thus Spake Zarathustra, his book, the protagonist of this book, Zarathustra, has to discover new realities for man. Now grand reality which human beings had the concept of God is dead, larger, that broader, that all encompassing moral horizon has disappeared, it is no longer there. So now you have to discover new realities for yourself to create new meaning out of the chaotic aftermath of God's death. See, once God is not there, then as stated by Dostoevsky in his novel Brothers Karamazov, everything is possible then. So it opens up a boundless domain of freedom, anything and everything is possible in that context. So here there is a kind of chaos, and out of this chaos you have to create your own values. The concept of overman or superman is introduced in this concept. So this is another important concept in Nietzsche's philosophy, the idea of overman or overcoming man. I just have two quotes here. It says, I quote, "I teach you the overman. Man is something that shall be overcome. What have you done to overcome him? All creatures so far have created something beyond themselves, and you want to be the ebb of this great flood and even go back to the beast rather than overcoming man." Again, thus this is from Thus Spake Zarathustra describes the path of overcoming man as consisting of three stages: camel, lion and the child. So, but before that, see, this whole notion of overman is again rooted in the notion of the will to power. The will to power, as I already mentioned, is that driving force of life which enables man to overpower. Overpower his surroundings, overpower his own status quo, his own reality which limits him, which controls him or which consists him. And this actually, he says that this is done through a process, a kind of metamorphosis takes place in three stages: the camel, the lion and the child, where the camel represents the average man. It kneels to accept its load, just as we kneel to carry the weight of what we believe are our duties. So here the camel moving in the desert is a metaphor which never complains, which can move miles and miles without any water or food. It just obeys because it thinks that it is its duty, like the average man does things thinking that it is his duty, never questions it. So he carries the burden of the tradition, of all these moral traditions. Again, a sense of duty in bearing what is ordered to bear. We feel guilt if we do not maintain the burden. So this is another, this is a consequence of, or rather an implication of this view. If an average man always has this guilt feeling if he does not do what he was expected or ought to be done. Obeys the thou shalt with no protest. The camel does not will, there is no will present, because all will is essentially controlled or dominated by the will to power, but the will to power is being annihilated, the camel, or camel allows it to get annihilated by the tradition, by customs, by religion, by morality. So that what it does, it obeys what it ought to do. What it ought to do is always given by the society, by institutions, by the church, by moral traditions, etc. It has given its will to what it believes are its duties. Now the next stage is the transformation to a lion. Like the camel that moves in the desert, the spirit moves in its own desert, and here it encounters a reality. What happens in the loneliest desert? The spirit becomes a lion. He wants to conquer his freedom and be a master of his own desert. Here the spirit will encounter the thou shalt, fight it and conquer it. And here what happens, the lion then says no and violently kills the status quo of thou shalt. So here the lion actually goes against those factors which controlled it and says no, it kills the thou shalt, but not completely free from the morality of good and evil. See, now what happens is, now with this killing of the thou shalt, killing of this moral, the morality, the dichotomy, the morality that functions on the basis of the dichotomy of good and evil, it has escaped from that, but now there is a chaos. Now it has to create its own morality, which is incapable of doing it at the moment, because it is the weight of the burden of the past is already there, it is there, it is still there. So it is yet to overcome the burden completely. So the next stage is where the child, where it completely overcomes it. It is the child, I mean if you examine the child is totally unremorseful, because the child is not bothered by the moralities of good and evil which we adults are trained and bothered about. The child is completely unremorseful, it does things just because it wants to do things, it never thinks about consequences, and gradually the child learns because we train them, we discipline them, we domesticate them. The society does all these things, discipline the child, and the child is gradually initiated to a world of good and evil, to a moral tradition of good and evil. So here the child is the overman who says yes. It is not just it actually goes beyond the violent no of the lion and says a positive yes to life and creates a new reality and a new self. The child creates its own morality because it is not bothered and worried about the morality of good and evil. It applies its will in developing and achieving unique values and developing autonomy, it creates itself. So the child is compared with the overman, a strong and free individual who has overcome man in himself, has overcome his trivial, weak, petty tendencies through a process of self overcoming. It rejects all creations of the self by external factors like religion and morality, but creates himself. So there is an assertion of self creation, and it is not prepared to get created by others. It writes its own stories, the overman writes his own stories and never allowed to allow his story to be written by others. No, thou shalt know what is ought to be done, but what it wills. So there is a clear assertion of the will to power, and the will to power is dominant. Overman creates his own values and lives fully and passionately. So I have just two quotes here. I just quote, what is the ape to man? So he actually talks about evolution, and he says that evolution, every other creature produced its higher creature. What is the ape to a man? A laughing stock or a painful embarrassment, and man shall be just that for the overman, a laughing stock or a painful embarrassment. Again I quote, man is a rope stretched between beast and overman, a rope over an abyss, a dangerous crossing, a dangerous on the way, a dangerous looking back, a dangerous shuddering and stopping. So here he talks about, he actually mentions, he talks about this evolution. Every creature has evolved to its higher species, every creature succeeded in producing its higher species as a result of evolution, following the principle of evolution. And what is this principle of evolution? It is a principle of overpowering one's status quo. It is with the assertion of the will to power, but evolution stops with man. In a sense, biological evolution stops with man, because with the evolution of, or with the emergence of consciousness, biological evolution stops with man. Now evolution needs to take a new turn. From here man has to evolve and produce his higher species, the overman, but man has failed to do that. Why? Nietzsche says man failed to do that because of these conditions which man applies on himself in order to domesticate him, in order to discipline him, in order to culture him. So all culture, all civilization, all religious traditions and all moral traditions have ultimately done a great damage to humanity by stopping man from evolving further from man to overman, from man to the superman. So this morality of equal salts, which is the moral philosophy, and the religious morality which traditional philosophical traditions advocate, actually has the power in sort of stopping man from evolving further to the domain of superman, overman. Now I will wind up this discussion on the philosophy of Nietzsche. This quotes, one overcomes oneself to become oneself. What does your conscience say? You shall become the person you are, not the person you ought to be, because this ought to be is not something which you have willed about you, it is something which is which others have commanded and you are obeying. So you have to actually overcome that and start asserting yourself. This is from Gay Science, and the thus spake Zarathustra says, the new values and the process of value creation are not prescriptive. I cannot give your value, someone else's value. This is now my way. Where is yours? Thus I answered those who asked me the way, for the way does not exist. The way does not exist. The way is the way which is cited by religious traditions, moral philosophies. There is no the way for all human beings. We have to create our own lives. So Nietzsche in that sense is a perfect philosopher of freedom, who advocates complete autonomy for human beings and higher states of existence by assertion of human freedom and creativity. So the three terms which I would say are most important in understanding Nietzsche's philosophy are freedom, creativity and power. With this we will wind up this discussion on the philosophy of Nietzsche. Thank you.